Welcome to the Who I Am podcast with Mandolyn Freeland, Marcely Woofenden, and special guest. We are dedicated to sharing women's stories from all walks of life. We will be diving into experiences, challenges, and triumphs. If you are a woman, then this podcast is for you, and we are so glad that you found us.
Hi, everyone. Hey, so I'm Mandolyn Freeland, and we have Marcy, my sister.
Hi.
Hey, so today's podcast, I'm super excited because I have a dear friend, DeAnn Zaborowski, who I actually met through a student of mine at Mandolyn Academy a couple of years ago. She came to my school, this student, and said, "Hey, you need to meet my boss. She does fascia blasting." And at the time, I was really actually intrigued with fascia blasting, and I thought, yeah, I need to call her. And I think I had her contact information for a good probably 8-10 months before I even reached out. But I'm so glad I did. DeAnn and I, we had a phone call. Our first phone call was late at night, and it was longer than I thought it would be. I thought it would just be like a 20-minute call. And I think we talked for like an hour and a half. And we just both just have the same interest and just clicked. And DeAnn is talented in multiple areas, but she is my massage therapist and also probably my therapist when I'm in her studio. And I just love hearing DeAnn's stories. I love hearing her insight. She does so much research, and I'm just always in awe, and I love that we're friends. So I've asked DeAnn to join us today. Hi, DeAnn.
Hello.
Okay, DeAnn, tell us who you are.
Such a big question, right? So I grew up in Idaho. Well, I was born in Utah and I grew up in Idaho. When I was about 5 or 6, my mom remarried and we moved up there. And it was a small town. It was less than 2,000 people, I think, about 1,400. So it was a big change. There's 5 of us in our family, and then my parents, and we all lived in the back of this movie theater in a 1-bedroom apartment. And it was very close and cozy, very quick off, but very humble beginnings for my mom and stepdad's marriage. And well, it was a farm town and not a lot to do. I grew up there. I was there for till my early 20s. I was probably the last one out of the kids to leave. Everyone left in their teens, my siblings, meaning they all moved back with my dad here in Utah. And that was important because there was lots more to do in Utah than there was in Idaho. So, but I stuck around. I'm very close with my mom. She's my best friend. And but eventually I got the itch and I moved out and moved to Seattle. Packed my car up. Didn't have a job, didn't have a place. I just moved. I'd spent actually a weekend there right during 9/11. I flew home the night 9/10, right before 9/11 happened. And but I fell in love with Seattle, and so I just said, okay. I came up with a plan. When I come up with an idea, I go for it. So moved up there, got a job with an old district manager that I worked with in a previous company when I was in Idaho. She hooked me up and eventually moved out to Philadelphia with the corporate office, and then I got to travel for a long time. I opened about 143 stores for the company that I worked with, and I got a lot of travel in and super enjoyed it a ton. It was my favorite job in the world, but then the economy hit. And I moved back to Seattle and I'd gotten married, I had a daughter, so life transitioned and changed, and then, as it always does, transitioned again in about 2011, and I moved back to Utah. So I just did kind of a full circle. I said I'd never do that. I'd never move back to Utah. But I find that nevers are no good because that's usually what comes to fruition. So, yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
I remember you telling me a story about, did you like live in your car for a day or something?
I was homeless actually for a little while in Seattle. I was going through a divorce, and I'd lost my job. We weren't opening stores during the economy in 2008, 2009. And so I worked really hard to try and get another job. With a young child, it was really difficult. Childcare was so expensive if I could even get a job. It was either pay rent or pay for childcare. And so yeah, we thank goodness she was so young because she thought we were camping.
That works.
So it was good. It was good in that aspect. That was the silver lining, is as long as she didn't know quite the dire straits we were in, but that's where pride comes in, right? Where all my family was in mostly Utah. My mom's still in Idaho, and I didn't want to come back here. I was very prideful. I had worked really hard in a career. Making money isn't everything, right? It brings certain financial freedoms, but it was such a huge thing for me because I actually dropped out of high school at one point, and so there was a lot of personal attachment to being successful for me, and so I sucked it up. I mean, it got to the point where, am I going to live in a car? Am I going to get a job? Am I not? What am I going to do? And my younger brother, my little hero, he flew out to Seattle, and he helped me pack up what I had in storage and tow my car back in the middle of winter. And there we were. He brought me back here. So it was kicking and screaming. But it was the best decision I ever made because my life has transformed exponentially since I've been back. So,
Yes, I'm grateful.
me too. So, yeah, well, I mean, when I got back here, I was starting over. I was in the process of a divorce. I had less than $100 in my account. I moved in with my dad, whom I'd never lived with. My parents divorced when I was less than 2. And so I don't remember any kind of life of living with my biological father. And so that was an interesting reintroduction for both of us because we're very similar. We're very ambitious, very stubborn, very right all the time. And when you have two right people that are on the opposing sides of a subject, one of us probably isn't right. It was never me, though. I mean, it was never him. It was usually me. But,
Yeah, you're the right one. Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, and then so what do? You regroup, right? I mean, you can fall as many times as you want, as many times as you don't want, as many times as life punches you in the gut. It's about what do you do with that information? Do you keep going? Do you stay down? And if you stay down, how do you manage that? I had a lot of really challenges in my divorce. It took me a long time. He was not somebody who was easy to get a hold of, so it took about 3.5 years, I think, to get him served. And I mean, it was a really long, drawn-out process. But went back to school. I mean, what do you do when you don't know what to do? Get more education. And so I went back to school for my Earth and Environmental Science degree. And when I got done with that, I circled back to massage, which was, I say circle back because when I was 19, I was planning on going to massage school. I was registered to go, and I was working for a company that at 19 threw me a lot of money and said, here you go. And I said, okay, I'll stay. And so, yeah, I went back in my late 30s to go to massage school, and I'm doing now what I was meant to do all along. But I think that all of the aspects that brought me to that point were instrumental in becoming a business owner, instrumental in where I'm at now as a whole collectively, because I learned and knew a lot of things that I wouldn't have otherwise. So when I got done with massage school, the day I graduated, I signed the lease to my place, and I went from there. And that was in 2016. I started school. I graduated in 17, and have been a lifelong student ever since. I love learning. I love education. As you know, we have lots of conversations back and forth about all sorts of things. And I don't get bored. Well, if I do get bored, I just learn some more. So
That's right.
there's
That's right.
there's lots to know. There's way too much to know and not enough time to know it all. But when I do get interested in something specific, I tend to dive deep into it because I like to know as much possible information as I can. And the body is a big dive deep into. I mean, there's so much to do with our bodies. And so, yeah, here I am.
I love that. And really, it's never too late, right?
No. Well, and that's the thing. I went to UVU and this was back in 2012 when I went back to get my degree. And one of the questions was, how many middle-aged people are here? Because I'm going to school getting my generals with these 18-year-olds that are fresh out of high school, that everything they remember and it's been years since I've had any coverage of a lot of the subjects. So learning the basics again was hard, and technology is continually changing and making things so much easier and for the youngins, but the old people, it makes it sometimes harder. So, but it was a great experience. Middle-aged or not, never stop learning. So
Love it. So you mentioned like you like to dive in deep, dive in head first. That's you, and you find out so much. I want you to kind of talk about your sister recently passed away, and I know that was very unexpected. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
yeah. My beautiful sister, who also was a lifelong servicewoman. She was a nurse practitioner, or not a nurse practitioner, excuse me. She was a registered nurse. And right out of high school, she went into nursing. So she spent a lifetime in it. She was 56 years old and had an elective minor procedure. And that was it. Had some complications, and still don't have. I still don't have all the information, of what fully happened. But in the middle of the procedure, apparently her heart had stopped, and when it had stopped, they were able to revive her through CPR, and they sent her over across the street. She was in her doctor's office in a professional building. Went across the street to the ER. Her heart stopped again. They got her heart back beating again, and then she was in ICU for just about a week in a coma.
This is like a worst nightmare scenario.
Well, there's so many things about it that's a worst nightmare. I think that, if we're living and we have loved ones, we all get to experience this, unfortunately, on some level, in some degree, losing someone you love. But I mentioned something earlier about pride, and it's such a dangerous thing. I hadn't actually talked to my sister for, I think, since about COVID started. Been almost 4 years. And so I had just worked a 12-hour shift at work. And after a 12-hour day of massage, it's pretty exhausting. And my mom had called. It was about 9:30. And so I knew something wasn't right, because that just wasn't typical on how she did things. And she just said, we need to say a prayer for your sister. And she started talking to me about kind of what had happened with Lisa. And I was in shock, because I hadn't talked to my sister in a really long time. And so, of course, we three-way called my other sister, and my sister Michelle says, okay, well, I'm on my way to the hospital. Are you coming with? And I stopped for a minute, because I didn't know what the right thing was to do. Obviously I was in shock to think of my sister being in a coma. But I hadn't talked to there was a huge separation. I think COVID was really difficult for a lot of families in a lot of situations. And so it had been a long time since I had seen a lot of my family.
Well, and especially for you, because your sister was a nurse, right? And so I think for anybody that had, family members that were in the medical field, there was a lot of clashing of idea there.
Yeah. I just to kind of back up a little bit, my dad's very Western medicine. I mean, that is his world. And my mom's very naturopathic inclined. She has a unique genetic makeup that makes things very difficult for her to do in the Western way. But for me, it's kind of melding those two things, right? We do a lot more functional stuff in this world, which I really love and enjoy, because I think there's a place for everything and everyone when we bring it together. And
Yeah.
And so, yeah, with that type of situation, it was complicated because we're stuck between two different realms of a world that you have to do this dance in, where it's not who's right and who's wrong. I mean, fear plays a big part in, I think, complications, and COVID was very scary for a lot of people. So I back to the hospital, I hesitated in going because I didn't want my presence to create any conflict with the rest of my family, because I hadn't seen anybody for so long. I was envisioning a very difficult, stressful thing for her husband, her children, and everyone that was there. And so, of course, I wanted to be there. I wanted to just, in an instant, be there. But I didn't know if it would be the right thing to do, to create any conflict. So I got off the phone with my sister and her husband. Everyone's navigating and getting to the hospital, and I was driving home, and I pulled up into my garage, and I changed my mind, and I went to the hospital. I just went to the parking lot. I didn't go inside, but I wanted to be near my sister as close as I could be under the circumstances. So, so yeah, there was a lot of stuff going in there. I mean, I have a lot of regrets with that, and you don't realize, and it's talked about a lot. I mean, we talk about time. We all have the same 24 hours, but when is that 24 hours going to ending for you or for me or for the rest of us? I mean, someone who goes to work and doesn't come home at the end of the day. We don't know those dynamics. And I shamefully had not talked to my sister for so long. And I thought I had time. I thought one day we'll work it out. She's my sister. I didn't think that the last thing I ever said to her would be the last thing I ever said to her. And it wasn't kind. It was kind. I mean, it was conflict. So it was a very emotional conversation that we were having. And so yeah, saying goodbye was really, really tough, because I really should have said, I'm sorry, way before I ever said goodbye. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Like, I know this is so recent too, and you are like so strong for being able to just share this with us. I have goosebumps like the whole time. So, I only know very little of her story. And you said she had the surgery and then her heart stopped. They brought her back. Did she stay in the coma like the whole week? Like, did she ever respond to you at all being there, or no?
So that's the interesting thing, because in all that I do, I live in the land of possibility. And I think that if we were to talk about science, right, when we talk about Western and more natural forms of things, when we talk about science, it's always questioning, right? I mean, that's what we're doing. And I naturally do that anyway, is question. The what if the possibility. I mean, even when I'm talking with my clients, they come in and they have a set mindset of a certain situation or what they're managing or whatnot. But, my question is, well, what if this was possible, or what if this was possible? And the reason why that's important in your question is that we're taught a lot of things in whatever field we choose to work in. And what we're taught doesn't have to be the end all be all, because we're always learning, right? And so being open to new information and understanding things on a different scale, and pride, it got in the way for me, just on the level with my sister and my family. But it can get in the way for all of us. I mean, in whatever we do. So she was in a coma the whole time until they let her go, and it was quite an emotional experience. I mean, a lot of back and forth, but I question a lot of things. And one of the questions that I had, that several of us had, was, what's the possibility of her coming back from this? And when they did the MRI, they came back and said that she had a catastrophic brain failure. I don't know if failure is the right word, but it was catastrophic, meaning that the dark matter of her brain was all dark and there was no activity. So most of us spent as much time at the hospital as we could have. I didn't have a ton of time with her. I did go in there, rubbed her feet, rubbed her arms, anything I could do to touch, because touch is so important. I mean, they know that in the neonatal portions of the hospital, having the baby next to the touch is super important for our bodies. And so there was one night that she had had some EEGs, lots of testing going on and whatnot. And the EEGs, when they put the units on their head, they literally glue them on to hold them, and it's really difficult to get out. So my aunt, my sister, and my niece and I were there, and everybody had gone home for the day. And the nurse came in. They changed over nurses, and so we were asking a lot of questions to this she was a nurse for maybe a year. But anyway, we ended up staying the night with my sister. That wasn't a planned thing. We started out with helping get the glue out of her hair with a comb. They used acetone, and it was awful to do, because she would grimace, right? I mean, just like if you're doing your young child's hair and you're combing it and they're just making these looks. And I remember questioning a lot of things, because here she's supposed to be brain dead. And how can a brain dead individual feel? Because what I was witnessing looked like she could feel everything we were doing to her. So it was difficult. So I told my other sister, we were both had each side of her head, and I told my other sister, I said, we need to stop doing this. It's painful to me to watch her look like she's in pain. But there was a lot of things that happened. We worked with her feet, and I was doing some things with her feet, and asked the nurse about it, and the nurse said, no, that's just her being cold. And so anytime I brought up forms of movement and things that were happening, it was just boom, 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 boom. No, 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 right? They're looking for very...
Did we lose her? Oh, there she is.
Did I go away?
For a second.
Oh, for a second? Okay. It's my magnetic personality. But anyway, it was very challenging, but I had a lot of questions, because I'm not in the field to the capacity that these people are who are caring for my sister, but I can think logically, and I can understand connection and touch and different things. And so I did ask a lot of questions, and I experienced a lot of things. So I feel like I connected with my sister quite a bit. They would tell you, they in the hospital would have a reason why everything happened the way that it did. And I realized that there's information and studies and whatnot. But since then, I've done a very deep dive, as I do when I come across something that interests me. And the death of my sister quite much interests me. I've done a deep dive in brain death and what that looks like and what that means. And I came across this doctor who has spent, she was an anesthesiologist, and she has spent much of her life since she left the medical field or her practice, talking about brain death, what it is, what it isn't, organ donation in the process of brain death, because in the medical community there's quite a controversy on cardiovascular death, brain death. You know, when you're brain dead, your heart's still beating. So it's a complex thing, but they've had so many people that have had experiences that have come back from brain death. My uncle's one of them. He was in the hospital actually at one point, and he was brain dead, and he had a full recovery. I mean, you talk to him now, I mean, he has done a tremendous amount of research. So for me, just knowing that there's one person, let alone many people that have recovered from it, makes me question, like, what is the process that we're doing, and is it the right process? Are we doing the best thing that we can for people that are in this situation?
DeAnn, I'm curious, how long was your uncle in the hospital, and how long did he have to bounce back?
I can't remember. We did talk about the length of time. He had come down for the funeral, and so we had kind of an extensive conversation about that, but it was much longer than 7 days. 7 days seems to be about the cutoff time, where if someone is in a coma, unless, someone, I don't want to say fights for it, because I mean, her whole family was fighting for her. Her whole family wanted her to survive this trauma. But the medical community, I think, has a really important place in supporting us, and they don't know everything. They know a lot, but they don't know everything, and that's a dangerous thing, because they're giving us advice on how to proceed, right? And when it comes to brain death, there's not a lot that they do to give anybody, and this is a general statement, I want to be very generalized when I say this, because I'm sure that there are people out there that are different, and just like this doctor I referenced earlier who's spent a lot of time with brain death, and even what she says in her studies is that we don't let people have enough time for recovery with brain death. There have been people that have given birth who are brain dead, people who start menstruation cycles when they're brain dead, people who continue to grow. Like, if somebody is brain dead, how are they able to do these things? How is their body able to function that way? And that's, I think, a really big question. How are they able to do that?
Yeah, well, I'm curious timing wise, because most of us, most listeners, have not had someone really close to them, um, you know, get into a situation where they've had to decide to pull the plug.
Yeah.
Right. And my dad recently asked me to be in charge of that for him. If anything happens to him, he doesn't want to stay alive on a machine, and I'm to pull the plug. And I had to think about that. I'm like, I don't know if I'm the right one that can do that. Right. But I'm going to tell you right now, like, if my husband was in that situation, or my brother, I would not be okay with 1 week. Like, that to me blows my mind. Yeah. And I guess I just am wondering, like, what does the hospital usually do? Are they all different? Do they say like a week is protocol? Like, because I would certainly want it more than a week. I've seen way too many movies and awesome success stories of people bouncing back after weeks and months.
Well, and that's the thing this doctor speaks really specifically about, and that is that we don't know how many people truly would come back, because we don't give them enough time. And in my mind, in the logic sense, it's like, when, even if we just reference COVID, if someone had COVID, they were given 2 weeks, right? 2 weeks to recover and all this, and on that much smaller level of a concern. I mean, obviously a lot of people lost their lives with that, but I mean, when most people were sick with COVID, you were given a certain amount of time to isolate and recover. And so I think that with a brain injury, a brain death, that 7 days is certainly not long enough to come back from at all. I think 30 days. I mean, you're talking about an organ that's gone through a tremendous amount of trauma. And in that trauma, we're expecting it to recover in 7 days. Like, people don't, I mean, you have massive surgeries, people don't recover in 7 days. 7 days is not long enough. But the difficulty is not only the 7 days, but some of the things that are done within that 7 days, like the supplements that they're giving them during that recovery period aren't, I mean, vitamin C. They don't even give them vitamin C. I mean, that's an important thing for inflammation and recovery. They give them a glucose IV bag to do, I don't know, to keep them on some form of liquids. But the supplemental aspect definitely needs to be, in my belief, and what I'm understanding so far in this deep dive, reevaluated. Now, if what I'm understanding is true, it's if somebody's more of a long-term stay, and there was a technical term that she used for this, and I'm thinking it's closer to like 2 weeks or more, they do change what they do supplement them with. But why aren't we doing that from the very beginning? Why is that the case? And the thing is we, family members, are looking to these experts to have the answers, and they're humans and they're not going to have all the answers, and I'm okay with them not having all the answers. What I want is someone to know that if they don't know, they're going to do everything they can to find out what are the possibilities. And it's back to that, what are the possibilities. I think the most difficult part about my sister's death is I don't believe that she had to die. That's probably the most difficult thing. And I don't think her husband had an easy decision. I think my mother, her first husband, so Lisa's my half sister technically, but she was my full sister as long as I knew her. But my mother was married at a young age, her first husband, and her first son, Daryl, would be my oldest brother, he died within the first month of being born. And then when Lisa was 6 months old, my mom's first husband was hit and killed by a train, and he was in a coma for a week. And she had to make a decision as well. And so she had been in a very similar situation that her daughter's husband, had to do. So it's not an easy thing to do by any means, but we're making these decisions based upon the information we're being told. And I personally have had a medical situation in my life where I wasn't given all the information, and then I was told to make a decision, and later on found out the rest of the information, which would have totally changed what I decided. And so we're trusting them with our family members' lives, and not an easy thing. I mean, they have a tough job. I don't want to say it's just an easy thing. One, two, three, boom. But it is something that we can't be closed-minded about at all. And if it's not working, then what are we doing? Still doing the same protocols, right?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a really good point to our listeners, as far as I think just don't settle, right? I think we assume if someone's a professional that they know what's best, and that may not always be the case for each individual that they're working with. And so I think the best thing that we can take away from listening to you is to really be there and do our research and not trust in a professional just because they're a professional.
Well, I mean, it's just like a lot of times, I mean, if you look at this, doctors go through a lot of school and they have a lot of hours, but they don't have a ton of nutrition time, right? Unless they're a specialist in something. And so sometimes we can't expect someone to have all the answers. And that's okay that, like I said, if they don't, that's okay. But let's explore what the possibility is. And the difficulty and the deep dive in this world when it comes to this particular thing is a very controversial subject, and that comes down to organ donation. So many people check yes on their driver's license, because who doesn't want to help another person, right? If we're no longer here, if we're no longer using the parts of our body, why not share that with others? And I am for, in my mind, full disclosure. Whatever you decide to do for yourself in your life, in your world, free agency is really an important thing. We should be able to choose for ourselves what that is. I think that we also need to know everything possible when making that form of a decision. And so there's a lot of organ donors. I've since this, I've talked to a lot of people. It is a very controversial thing because socially speaking, it's the right thing to do, you know, if you pass. So part of that deep dive, I went into it because I have people I know that have received organs, you know, from other people that I care about. I mean, it's a spectrum thing on each side, but it's the thing about it is the process in which the organ donation capacity happens. And I think that when people check yes on the box, they're checking yes to the idea of saving someone else's life. And who doesn't? Like I said, who doesn't want to do that? I mean, I'm in a service industry. I love helping people. That's what makes me thrive. And so I want to help as many people as I can. But I think that probably the majority of anyone that I've talked to about the organ donation process does not know what it entails and what it looks like. And that in itself is controversial. So I think that what I encourage in any aspect of any subject is to find out all of the information and then make that decision for you. And if you check yes, that's great. Check yes. If you've got all the information and you know what you're checking yes for, then I back that up 100%. But like I said, most people don't understand the dynamics of what happens. Most people don't get to donate their organs. Most organ donators that check yes don't fit the capacity. And part of that is if you're in a cardiovascular death, if you're in, say, a car accident, as soon as your heart stops, your organs are viable for a very, very minuscule amount of time. But if you are brain dead, your organs are, and most of your organs are viable for a much longer period of time. So it's handled differently. So I want to be respectful of people who have received or who choose to say yes, because again, I think that we should be able to choose that. I just encourage people to do their own deep dive into things that are important. So you can go to the organ.gov website. One of the facts questions is that it talks about, and I thought this was really interesting because it's a common thing that's said, you know, is it true that if you're an organ donor, they're not going to do everything they can to save your life? And of course, it's false, right? Because they're going to do everything they can to save your life. That's what they take a vow to do. The conflict is when you're in brain death, then even in the own industry themselves, there's a conflict on what that means and what do you do with that? Because your heart's still beating, and in order to have viable organs that are going to be able to help someone else, there's an entire process that goes into play, and it surprised me. It surprised me that it was the process that it was, and it surprised me that it's even okay. And so for me, you know, I made my decision of what I wanted to do, but I've also gone and done that deep dive. So, and by the way, I've met a lot of people in the medical community who are not organ donors. I found that interesting too. So, you know, we all have an individual choice and ability. And my sister was an organ donor, and she was part of the 1% that was able to donate her organs. And I know that her family, and I say her family, or her immediate family, are very proud of her for that, because Lisa was a woman of service to the very end. I just hope it didn't cost her life. So.
Thank you again, DeAnn, for sharing all of that, and sharing your research and knowledge with us, because some of those things I haven't been in your situation, so I haven't dove into that either, but I definitely want to do more myself, reading and, on some certain things. So thank you for, again, opening our eyes to some of the things that you unfortunately just had to experience and go through, and for being so strong to share with us here today. And we know you with so much more amazing like body work and things like that, which we want to definitely bring you back more into that. Can you tell us before we close just how people can follow you?
Oh yeah, of course. I'm not the best social media person in this world. We all have to have an opportunity somewhere, so that's definitely mine. But my website's just utahcounthytherapeuticmassage.com, and then I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, and that's UCT Massage and the Fascia Boss, because fascia is where our health is at. So. Yeah.
Yes, I love that so much. And like I said, we definitely want to deep dive into that. So we will be having you back to join us for that.
And can I just add a quick something real fast?
Of course.
If anyone is interested, in knowing some of the names and things like that of the doctors and whatnot, I'm happy to always share that kind of information. When you make claims, you've got to be able to have the information to provide that as well, because there is a lot of really good information out there when you go and look for it. So I'm not just spatting off, it's an emotional thing to lose your sister. And under these circumstances, it was horrific because it was elective and it was preventable. But at the same time, I want to make sure that if anyone's interested in going into a deep dive, I'd be happy to share any information that I have. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, DeAnn, and thanks again for being here with us today.
Thanks, DeAnn. We love you.
Thank you very much. We'll see you.
Thank you for joining us. If you feel in your heart to be a part of our community for women, check us out at thebreakthroughtribe.com.